I think especially in opera and classical music, there's the perception that you have to just do that and concentrate on that sometimes, and stepping out of that world can be scary, but actually I enjoy the variety, be able to do lots of different things at the same time, and they're all feeding into my singing work, and my singing feeds into this work that I'm doing at the moment, and I don't feel like it's a case of forsaking one of those strands and concentrating on the other. I hope that everything is fed and improved by the other aspects. So yeah, I'm encouraged by this period, and I'm more open to bringing all of these things together, and maybe even creating a performance that's based on this project, and is a musical show drawing on these stories and histories, and finding composers that were writing around the same time, composers of color who were writing around the same time as some of these portraits were painted as well, and looking for the connections and the parallels across history as well, and how they speak to each other.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic. And from a very selfish point of view, if you manage to expand it to look at, was it Joseph Bologna, the composer in France?
Yes,
who was black as well. I mean, the first time I came across his work, I was astounded, because that'd been the first time I'd actually heard of it, and then going to see some other composers as well. So that sounds amazing to me.
Yeah, and there were composers like Chevalier Saint-Georges, who was a contemporary of Mozart, and we know that Mozart knew him and mentioned him in letters, and there was probably quite a lot of competition between the two of them. They stayed in the same house when Mozart's mother died, when they were in Paris. So they who knows what conversations they had, and but these stories don't tend to be told, and but history is so much richer for having all of these different stories told with the same value and airtime.
So I think the same with it. I'll go back to Equiano again. I mean, he lived with one of the founders of the London Corresponding Society, and was one of the early members of the London Corresponding Society. And you just think about the conversations that were had, kind of the idea of you putting a show together just is fantastic. I've seen clips of your Degenerate Art show as well, which also looks really, really good. And again, knowing you've got a room with quite a lot of history teachers in, who wouldn't have been aware necessarily that you'd done a performance around artwork that was banned by the Nazis. I think you've probably got a new audience for that too. So, should we look at another picture?
Sure.
So the next one I kind of really wanted to talk about was the Brunias one. It wasn't, so I'd never heard of Brunias before I saw this, and I know it's probably the first one of your images that I really kind of interacted with quite a lot, because I loved the image, and then I loved finding out about him. So he was an Italian painter who lived in England, and went out to the Caribbean and did paintings for plantation owners. But along the way, he also did buttons for Toussaint Louverture, who led the Haitian Revolution. I think with this one particularly, he painted a lot of images. What drew you to this one of his images as opposed to any of his other paintings?
It was the title that drew me in for this one, Barbados Mulatto Girl. And through our family tree research, we've discovered that our fourth great-grandmother was recorded in the archives as mulatto, and she was of mixed race heritage. This was her father, and her mother was an enslaved African woman. And reading around the history and looking at this painting, you really get a sense of how this mulatto mixed race class were seen in society. And the original painting does a lot to convey that that message. The mixed race woman is at the center of the image. She's in fine clothes, in fashionable clothes of the day, the striped top, and she's with two enslaved women, vendors, street vendors. One of them is wearing the enslaved collar, and was perhaps being punished for trying to run away. And in the background, we see the plantation house. And the composition of the painting shows how the mixed race class, because there was a colored elite from their plantocracy ancestry, it meant that they were hovering just above the full black enslaved community and below the plantocracy in Barbados. And Brunias was vital at that moment in history because all of his images were coming back into Europe, and this is how people were receiving what it was like in the English West Indies. And so he was crucial in creating the myth of the Caribbean, and how the colored class were considered to be exotic, and they were sexualized. Yeah, I found this completely fascinating because I look at the family records and I see baptismal records where my grandmother is recorded as a free mulatto, and my grandfather is still enslaved. And then a bit later on, he's recorded as FBM, free black man. And all of these categories were crucial to sustaining and keeping the slave economy and slave system, slave society in place in the Caribbean. The implications of this are still felt today with issues of colorism in contemporary West Indian society and in islands like Barbados. And the legacy of that is still strong, and it really shows the power of art to influence and change how people think and change mindsets. And also, that it had a huge impact on the Black community, who, even after emancipation, lots of these structures stayed the same.
Yeah, and it's the same on mainland America as well, wasn't it? Kind of degrees of colour. I think that's what makes it all the more fascinating, that the leader of the Haitian Revolution chose Brunias to paint his buttons.
Yes.
And it's intriguing to know, did he see sort of perhaps a more agency, or because you definitely get a real sense of kind of culture and humour and from his paintings. They remind me of Hogarth, actually.
Yeah, there's a sort of cartoonish aspect to them, and some of the bigger works have a huge number of people in their market scenes, and
there's a Dominican dancing one, isn't there?
Yeah, so he spent a lot of time on the island of Dominica, and he observed Saturday markets and the enslaved community making music. So they're actually pretty useful for looking at domestic life. But yeah, I really wanted to put myself in this as the three figures. Because it's been hugely fascinating for me to find out about my family tree research. But given that my heritage is so mixed, it felt important to try and portray each character in this this painting. And yeah, I think they're really useful documents for exploring this period in British history as well.
Yeah, no, it was, you know, it's a really was a powerful one with me, that. So this one.
Some more questions in any more questions in the
Nick? Are there any more questions?
So I'm just checking. I got kicked out, so I can't see anything at the moment.
All right.
There is one from Ruth talking about the kind of connection between your family history research has led you to explore so much about the history of Barbados. Have you thought about writing a book using your images, your knowledge of history, your family history?
I'd love to write a book. It's something that I'm trying to explore at the moment. It's just making sure that the purpose is right, and yeah, the reasons for doing it. And I think if it did turn into that, it would have to be something that has impact and can be used as a used universally, and sort of promotes the art that I've been trying to platform as well in a meaningful way.
There's a really interesting, sorry to interrupt, there's a really interesting part of Emma Dabiri's book, Don't Touch My Hair. I don't know if you've read that.
I haven't yet, but I really want to.
Amazing, I strongly recommend it to everyone listening. She talks about a kind of a cultural difference between the way history is recorded and memorialized in West African traditions compared to the kind of Western tradition. And what I feel very much with your work is that you're consciously or subconsciously, you're drawing on that tradition of history is not a static point in the past. There is this line which connects you through generations of family or kind of cultural experience and brings that past so directly into the present day. Is that something that you were conscious of when you were making these pieces of work?
I think it's something that Sugar in the Blood. Yeah, I've got that. Sorry, there's something that's popped up. Yeah, it's on my list. I was conscious of that because it's taken me a long time to get to the realization that, having worried through my as a young adult and through my 20s and early 30s, that I didn't really know a lot about my history, my ancestry. There was this realization that all of this culture and heritage is hiding in plain sight. And because of the way history is transmitted orally, and without many things being written down, it is within the mindset and our bodies, in the way we dance and sing and make music. And I had this, it was a sort of celebration to realize that, yeah, actually this item that has been in the family for a long time and my mum uses to cook with is significant in that it is used to make the national dish of Barbados, which fortunately is something that survived enslavement. It's an African dish that was passed down and down through generations, and there is a history there, and it's an intimate history. It's something that is very, very close to me. It's how I was sustained as a baby, as an infant, and it's something that still sustains me now. And there are these elements of culture that we can draw upon to create our histories and find them and provide access into exploring the history. So yeah, it's something that I would like to share with people, with young people and other people in the diaspora and Black British culture, and this perception that we don't have a history, and things like Black Tudors have highlighted that, and the Black presence. And But you can look around your home and find the history there in the smallest and what might seem like the most insignificant bits of history as well. So
I think that comes through probably the most strongest in your recreation of the Paston treasure.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorites. And it was something that, it was quite a frenzied composition to put together. It was intense and not very, I'd say it was 2 hours from start to finish in terms of building the set and putting it together. And I think I had a lot of energy in putting it together because there was so much of my personal heritage and belongings in it. So I knew as soon as I looked at the original painting what I would replace things with. And the suitcase.
What are your favourite bits in this? What are you most pleased that you've included?
Probably the quilt. That was put together by my grandmother, and I think it was, yeah, it just works really well to replace the swag of the curtain in the original. And I wanted to convey this, the conflicts that occur in having a Black British identity. So it was fortunate that we had this roller blind that was left in the house when we bought it, a Union Jack print, and putting that against the West African print right next to it, and then my grandmother's quilt. They just talk to each other in a really lively, vibrant way, and then it was a conscious decision to wear the West African print fabrics in the jacket and the shirt, but then also the elements of my musical background and Black performers that mean something to me, that have inspired me, role models. There's an ancestor in the corner as well, and then across from that there's like the most mundane items, like hair products, but actually they speak in quite a significant way when they're placed with these other things. Yeah, so the ancestor is a John Brathwaite. There are many John Brathwaites in my family tree. My middle name is actually John as well, so yeah, it gets quite confusing. Yeah, so there are instruments. The suitcase is something that traveled with my parents when they moved to the UK. And there's a peony from the garden, which was the first peony to bloom this year. And there's some sheet music. And what I love about the original Paston Treasure is that the musical instruments there, they're all real instruments, and the sheet music is actually a well-known song of the day. So I haven't seen the painting live yet, but when I do see it, I'm probably going to be drawn to the sheet music first, because apparently you can actually read the notes.
Is it Norwich Castle, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I'm just really fascinated by this strand of art, the Vanitas painting, and the idea of thinking about mortality, but at the same time displaying all your wealth, and the fact that this was probably constructed by the Paston family, releasing one object at a time to the artist, and allowing him to paint it, and then putting it back in the cupboard. So you can see that there's a sort of collage feel to the composition, and that's probably because things were painted at sort of odd times and
top of each other.
Yeah, he didn't see all the objects laid out as a single still life, so I think that, it's just such a rich image to recreate.
And then just, when we look back at what you've done, it's just equally layered and just absolutely fascinating. Nick, Dan or Nick, have we got some more questions that are flashing up?
No, just it's mostly commentary. I think the question about who the ancestor in the corner has been answered, and Miranda Kaufmann's joined us now, and she's put a link to a book on the past and treasure. I have a question though. Jessie Norman, front and centre. What does she mean to you, and why is she there, front and centre?
Well, Jessie Norman she died fairly recently, and I think it's, in terms of role models, and we've got John Blank and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor as classical musicians in this country, and of course there are musicians that have come after that, Willard White, but Black British classical musicians are still a rarity. We see how much we celebrate the Carne Mason family in Nottingham and Sheku, and that is still seen as being extraordinary. And artists like Jessie Norman, who's in the foreground here, and Leontyne Price were pioneers, and America has been a huge source of inspiration to me, and American classical artists. There's a heritage there that extends from people like Marian Anderson, who sang and stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, having been rejected to sing at an event organized by the Daughters of the Revolution, and because she was Black and in a form of protest, she was invited to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and history like that is hugely powerful as an opera singer of color, and I've grown up often as the only Black person in this choir, or the only Black person in that choir, and that was a recurring theme growing up and entering the classical profession. So I've really hung on to figures like Jessie Norman throughout my career, and Leontyne Price, and my music room is sort of this homage to these artists, and I have their album covers framed on my walls, and I think it's important to see yourself in the work that you do and the spheres that you operate in, and so putting her center stage like that with the peony, which was a very exciting moment in the springtime to have that bloom the way it did. It felt like the right thing to do, and at the time was exactly what I wanted to say through recreating this.
Good. So,
sorry, there's two more questions that just popped up. So one's from Jenny. I think this is a really interesting one, and she's saying that she could look at the picture for hours, but she wonders whether you see the depiction that you've come up with as being harmonious or conflicting composition, or both.
Well, it's definitely conflicting, because I hope that because of the composition in my recreation, there is some dissonance with the original, and the way the young man is depicted, and the way I inhabit the space in my recreation, and conversations I'm having with the objects that I've chosen to include. I'm really struck by the original, and I like it, but I also recognize that it's the portrayal of the young Black man is problematic, and he is an exotic item. So I suppose the dissonance in mine is also the conversation about my place in the profession I'm in, and that counterpoint, having those Black artists there as well. So the idea of being still treated like an exotic item today in certain respects as well. So yeah, it's a combination of things, and when I look at the image, I see a different thing every time, and that's the great thing about putting something together with what you have in your house. You have the control to curate, but actually sometimes there are unexpected conversations that occur because of the necessity to fill the space with what you have.
I think you do a really good job of subverting the original paintings through where you're looking, or through your body language and the pose. And they're really subtle, but they make a huge difference to the kind of the story of the pictures. Was that conscious as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I've always, from the start, I wanted to subvert, and whether that's through a choice of fabric or item, just shake things up a bit, and it gives, wanting to give power back to the original sitters, and dressing him in indigenous fabric. It seemed appropriate rather than European finery, and then putting the low objects, the sort of cheap items like the hair gel in place of gold jugs and tureens, is a way of subverting, and
I've seen. I was with my son, who is in year 1. He's 5 years old.
Right.
On a Black History Month event at Sutton House in Hackney, close to where we live. And one of the activities they did, which was brilliant, was very similar to what you've been doing. They took the photo of Dido Bell, which is placed in the background, and they got these 6-year-olds to dress up in costume and reenact, much like you had done. And then they got them to move their position physically to kind of like, she came further forward in the portrait, and they changed hats and so on. And so, that kind of physical kind of change, that kind of movement as well, which was just so powerful to see with these young people. And I think an activity like that in the classroom, with your work alongside a kind of physical movement activity where the students can kind of reposition themselves and take on what you've done, I think would be amazing to see in a classroom.
I'd love to see young people doing this, and because I'm quite long in the tooth, but I find it hugely enjoyable and fascinating, and it gives you, there is agency there, and especially in recreating the Dido Bell image, the first thing that I did was crop the image, and my partner's hand is in there, and that was a decision to show the relationship that's there between Dido and Lady Elizabeth, but only have a small section of it, and it sort of feels, in the original, to me anyway, like she is being slightly pushed out of the space, and she is at the back, and she has this beaming smile seemingly, but I wanted to put her center stage, and again it relates to the perception of the mulatto in this period, and if you, on my website, you see that these are very close in the Bruniès and this painting, they happen around the same time. So we're definitely getting these political messages about what it means to be of mixed heritage at this time. And yeah, I find her gaze really arresting, and yeah, she looks as if she's still being kept on the margins in this composition.
Yeah, very much so. And to see those young kids just bring her to the front was it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Such a simple activity, so powerful, really.
Yeah, someone said that there was I think it's called A Stitch in Time, that program where they recreate clothing, period clothing. I watched that one. It was really, really fascinating.
Yeah. The one picture that I found kind of most uncomfortable probably was this one. When you look at and I don't know if you found it, because the collar, the slave collar is so, it's kind of hidden beneath the finery and almost looks like jewelry, but actually it's it's a symbol of everything, really, everything in that young man's life. And I wondered if you found it uncomfortable kind of putting that one together at all.
It's funny, sometimes I feel uncomfortable stepping into these paintings, and other times there is a disconnect, and I find it, there's something about constructing a slave collar when I'm preparing to do the recreation that is more powerful than actually stepping in to recreate the pose when I'm doing the composition. So actually the act of cutting the gold card and pinning it together or taping it together allows me to think more deeply about what this is and the symbolism behind it and the history behind it, and the fact that my ancestors quite possibly would have worn one of these. It's at that moment rather than in the composition. And yeah, I'm fascinated by this costume, the livery, and the fact that it looks like Father Christmas a bit. And I think there was a joyful element to it as well in realizing how close it was to the Santa costume that is readily available at home here. But that's the thing. A lot of the meditation and dealing with the difficulty of the history happens when I'm constructing the costume.
The object.
So cutting the fastenings that are on the jacket, all of those different things. But then this was recommended actually by Miranda Kaufmann. I didn't know the image. I think I'd seen it possibly once in on a website, and thought it might be too difficult to recreate. But it's actually in an exhibition that was cut short due to COVID in Barbados at the Barbados Historical Society and Museum. And
thinking about this one kind of in a classroom, I think kind of it would really make me reflect before I taught the lesson about my language and how the impact it's going to have on students, and just using that, because it's not an image that's going to do anything other than be impactful. And I actually think having your image alongside it would probably break the tension.
Yes, I think
especially having spoken to you about it. I don't know what you think, Dan or Nick. Right, but again, just so powerful through what you've done. And I'm looking at the time, and I know you need to get into five. Are you all right to still talk for a little bit, Peter?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So perhaps one that's a different type of story, if we get this one to work, is Joseph Johnson.
Oh yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about Joseph Johnson and And I think, how long did it take you to put together as well?
Yeah, so I put this together the day I found out that a very big opera contract that I had in the diary had been cancelled. So I think my depression made me more creative that day, and I just needed something to take my mind off that. So I set about trying to recreate the ship. I'd seen the image and thought it was too difficult, but thought I could get fairly close to it by using cardboard and fixing the cardboard in a particular way. And I worked out what I was going to use for the body of the ship. It's a basket. I knew that we had a fez in the fancy dress box. And so, yeah, I think putting the costume together took around an hour and a half. And then it was a case of taking the photograph. But I really wanted to do this because he was a musician, and he made his money in Covent Garden, on the streets of Covent Garden, singing, but also in other locations around London. And then he ventured out to the home counties and performed there, and became a bit of a personality, and was famed for his exuberant performances. And he would act out these songs, ballads by a composer called Charles Dibdin, and also a piece that had been composed by Handel but then reset to different text called The Storm, reworked by Dibdin, I think. And he'd been in the Merchant Navy, and like many other black men from that period, he was unable to claim benefits because he was not born in England. We think he was probably born in one of the Caribbean islands. And there are lots of parallels with Caribbean carnival dress. And there still today in Trinidad, there are costumes that include a ship worn on the head. And you'll see this in some of the images by Belisario, the Jamaican artist. So there is that echo of Caribbean African culture, the masquerade tradition, and also this symbolism of him being below the ship. And there is this theory that he was using this as a way of protesting for the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. So possibly he had experienced the Middle Passage himself, and been through that, and then found himself in the Merchant Navy. We don't know, but yeah, I think the idea of conversations of abolition happening, and him simultaneously sailing by would have possibly ruffled a few feathers and made people think about what was happening and their place in the grand scheme of things, as they were sipping their tea and scraping the sugar off their sugar cones. So yeah, all of the symbolism in this engraving really set my imagination alight, and I'm hugely attached to this now, and the portrayal of another musician. So like John Blank, he was obviously a talented performer.
You get a sense from some of the other kind of the ordinary people is just how kind of, well, how run of the mill being black and being in Britain was at the time. You've got the guy in Norwich, you've got the guy who's lost his legs probably in a naval battle on the back of the cart. And I think it's that experience of the average working person. They would have, they would have come across black people, they've been very aware, and they would have just seen them, you'd like to think, as just as another member of society, kind of grafting to get a living. Really.
Sorry, two questions here. The first one's from Hannah. I suppose this is a more very general question, but really important, which is, aside from the agency that you have, or if students were used to take part in this, is there anything else that we need to consider when showing black figures in the portraits to students? Because Hannah's worried about she may be unintentionally reinforcing an ideal that European culture is the standard.
Yeah, I think it's important to show, and as I've tried to do through the process of the project, is showing as broad a picture as I can, and also showing the progression that occurs throughout Western art. And a hugely important moment in the project for me was let me find it. The one that is based on the image of the Invisible Man. It's from 1980. It's by an American artist. It's
I'll find it, Peter. You keep talking.
Yeah. So that is a black artist looking at the portrayal of black sitters throughout art history, and I think it's important to include black artists dealing with this subject matter in their own right.
Is this the one you mean?
Yes, yeah. By Kerry James Marshall, and his whole body of work is about the portrayal of black people in Western art, and he loves Western art, but uses his practice to look at the color black, look at how black is used as a color in paintings, as a shade. So this is a study in the color black, as well as being a reference to an American novel from the 1950s called The Invisible Man, where a black man feels invisible because of his color. And likewise, the works of Kehinde Wiley, where he subverts these traditionally aristocratic Western poses and uses black sitters to imitate the poses in his studio and create these new images that speak to the past and the present and contemporary American society. He famously painted Barack Obama. So I think whenever you're looking at this work with young people, it's important to show the progression and to show that contemporary artists have taken it into their own hands as artists of color and are dealing with this heritage, and yeah, that there has been a transition has occurred. So yeah, the history is painful, but yeah, there is also a lot of light in it as well.
Some of the images really. Sorry, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, in kind of answer to Hannah's question, and think about how I would use images like this is always to give a context for it. And then, one of my colleagues, one of my previous schools taught art history. So anything that I needed, I went and said, right, what else is there in terms of looking at different types of art produced, during this period that I could use as a kind of a counterpoint. And that would be a really interesting thing to look at.
Yeah.
I think sorry, Peter,
I think Kehinde Wiley's paintings are a really useful way of showing that, because all of his subjects are empowered, and there are so many of them now as well. So it's a great body of work to show in contrast to those master-slave, master-servant narratives that are so prominent in the earlier periods.
Yeah, I think Yinka Shonibari's done some really interesting work as well, which I think would kind of lend itself to putting things into a context.
Yeah, and Sonia Boyce's work as well.
That's 1 second, I've got that one ready to go.
Was there another question?
Yeah, there was another question. This is from Kat, and she's asked, do you also look into who commissioned the paintings and how they were commissioned as well?
Yeah, so I think with an artist like Joseph Smith, who painted Joseph Johnson or Thomas Smith, that was for a book. So there were books being created of that were documenting everyday life and ordinary people in London. So I think it was like a bit like the cries of London documented songs. It was a pictorial manifestation of that, of street people. Similarly with John Dempsey, I think he took it upon himself to document ordinary people and elevate the ordinary through his images. So yeah, I think they're hugely important as documents of everyday working people, not just in London, but across the country as well. Yeah, some of the other ones I'm not really sure why they were commissioned. If they were vanitas paintings, of course, then they just fall into the strand of paintings that were created to show wealth and possessions.
So Peter, you've mentioned quite a few times the importance of kind of seeing musicians and music. I wondered if this Samuel Coleridge Taylor one has a particular meaning for you as well.
Yeah, well, he's obviously someone who is a role model for me. I went to the Royal College of Music, so did he, and it was empowering for me to know that someone like him had studied at the Royal College in that period as well. And I remember one of the first things I noticed when I walked into the foyer of the Royal College was that on the stand of postcards with images of the building and composers like Hubert Parry and Charles Stamford, these great figures in British history, and Vaughan Williams, there was a postcard of Samuel Coleridge Taylor, and it was one of the first things that I bought as a student at the college, and I had that pinned to my halls of residence wall throughout my time studying there. So yeah, it illustrates the importance of being able to see people that look like you in history, music history, and this was an opportunity to once again celebrate his achievements and reinforce the fact that he was a hugely influential composer and in the landscape of music history in this country and internationally. He was hugely important and popular. There were thousands of people turning up to the Royal Albert Hall in fancy dress, going to watch his performances of his oratorio. And, so I wanted to do this as my 50th portrait. So yeah, this was number 50, and I knew it had to be a musician, and there seems to be a really strong personal link here as well.
Well, I would be interested to know what music you've got on the stand and on the piano. Did you choose them particularly as well?
Yeah, so it's music on the music stand. It's music that I'm currently learning. I was meant to be doing a contemporary opera based on the novel by Richard Powers called The Time of Our Singing, and that is based on the story of an interracial couple who have mixed race children, and their difficulties of trying to navigate this during the 1950s in New York. So that score is on the music stand, and on the piano is the score of an opera I did to celebrate the abolition of slavery in the Dutch colonies in 2013, I think 2014. And I performed that in Amsterdam, and it was called Katibu de Chant, which is papiamentu, from master and slave. And it was set on the island of Curacao, and it was commissioned by the mezzo-soprano who I played alongside, and it told the story of her family, basically, her heritage. Yeah, that was a landmark moment in my career to be able to play a role like that. I was playing the role of Luis, who was a slave, and was the leader of one of the leaders of a slave revolt in Curacao. So yeah, I chose that specifically.
What I like about Taylor as well is that he was very political. He attended the first Pan-African Congress, didn't he? In London?
He did. Yeah.
And I think that for me that just kind of sums up one of the things I really love about this is that the connection between art, culture, and politics. You can't divide the two. And I think at the moment it's never been more important that the two come together and people make a stand and say things. And I think you've done that incredibly here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
It's 5:15. You've been incredibly generous with your time, Peter, and it's been absolutely fascinating.
No, thanks for having me, and hope I've been able to answer.
I don't know if there's any more questions, but certainly for me, it's what next for you, Peter? What next?
I suppose it's I'm currently writing and recording like this through my phone for Radio 3 at the moment, and I'm preparing for my next singing jobs, which fingers crossed should kick off in January 2021, and trying to develop this work, and I think I'll continue for the time being with the recreations. I'm not sure where it will end, but definitely see this as something that will feed into my musical practice as well. And I'm really keen to develop a show that uses this work and also allows me to develop the hunt for music written by enslaved communities in the Caribbean that has either been completely lost or forgotten or absorbed into contemporary music somehow. So I see this as aiding that, and hopefully at some point, I'm not sure how long it will take, but there will be a drawing together of all these different elements.
And, well, I'm sure you've got like an audience for the show here today. If anybody wants to do any wider reading, I'd definitely recommend Black Tudors by Miranda Kaufmann.
Yes.
If for no other reason than that David Starkey doesn't like it, which has got to be a good recommendation for any book. Let me just see if there's any more questions in the chat.
Yeah, and given the audience here, I should say that I'm really looking into trying to develop some sort of possibly schools program around this. So if anyone has any suggestions about this and how it could work, then please do let me know. Thank you.
I'm sure if you need anybody to give you a hand, I'm sure there's plenty of volunteers. I just really want to say thank you to Nick and Dan for helping out, for Miranda for contributing as well, and Miranda's given us a reading list which should be emailed out to you, or probably has been emailed out to you already. But particularly thank you to Peter, not only for giving us the time, but just for really inspiring us with the brilliant work. And long may it carry on, and I wish you all the best.
No, thanks
Absolutely.
for having me.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
No, brilliant.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you, everybody.